In the overcrowded brothels of ancient Athens, a woman's body could be rented for the price of 2 barley flatbreads, sometimes less than a jug of bitter wine. These women were called pornai, a word that didn't describe a profession so much as a status, disposable, nameless, spoken about the way men spoke about tools or animals. Courtroom speeches from Athens, men like Demosthenes and Lysias, hint at what daily life looked like inside these houses. A porn might be forced to service 6, 8, even 10 men in a single day, and still earn so little she couldn't afford more than a small scoop of lentils. The men who truly profited weren't the customers. It was the owners. Brothel keepers grew wealthy off this factory of bodies, so wealthy that part of their earnings flowed straight into the Athenian treasury through official taxes. The city didn't just tolerate this trade. In a very real sense, it earned from it, and Athens set no legal floor for age. That meant a girl could be sold into prostitution the moment she was old enough to survive the work. Archaeology and surviving records point to children, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, forced into these rooms and treated as inventory. Some enslaved girls were marked like livestock, branded on the thigh with heated iron, a permanent scar declaring to the world what Athens considered them: property. Inside, the rules were simple: obey or suffer. If a girl refused, punishment wasn't theoretical. It was immediate: public whippings, days without food, isolation, and sometimes worse, violence designed not merely to hurt her, but to make sure every other woman understood what resistance cost. The arrival of a new girl was often marked by a ritual so cruel it functioned like a warning bell. One account, attributed to a man from Thessaly, describes how a newcomer would be assaulted openly, in full view of the other women and even regular patrons, as if humiliation itself was part of the contract. Men reportedly jeered and laughed. A girl's terror became entertainment. And the sickest detail? A new girl wasn't tragic to them. She was valuable. Because untouched suffering was worth more. Men would pay 10 times the usual price for someone new, described with the same casual tone used for fresh fruit in a market stall. No privacy existed. Women worked in corners of large rooms, divided only by stained cloth and filthy mats. Every sound traveled: pain, crying, pleading, becoming part of the background noise while other men waited their turn. Before we go deeper into these buried histories of pain and survival, remember to like and subscribe. Supporting this channel helps us tell the stories of people who were silenced in life. Owners didn't even pretend this was human. They sorted women into categories like merchandise. Nubian women, exceptionally short women, women who couldn't speak, women who fought back, women described as still unbroken. Each type carried its own price, its own set of customers. 5th century art even suggests competitions, men attempting to overpower resisting women as sport. And the walls themselves confessed what polite history tried to hide. Graffiti found in brothel spaces suggests customers paid extra for cruelty: slashed faces, scars carved into skin, teeth smashed, bodies permanently damaged. Violence was not just tolerated, it was advertised. Some women were presented specifically as punishment objects: split lips, burns from oil lamps, broken bones. Their injuries weren't seen as warnings. To certain men, they were selling points. In the very city that worshipped philosophy, theater, and reason, human cruelty became one of its most profitable businesses. And even that daily horror was only the baseline. Because during certain religious festivals, especially those linked to Dionysus, prostitutes could be handed over to groups of men for free, framed as sacred tradition. A ritual, they claimed, a celebration. But for the women dragged into it, it was simply Athens doing what it always did, using religion to disguise violence and calling exploitation a form of culture. Surviving accounts describe these festival scenes with no shame at all, as if they were just another detail of civic life. Groups of drunken men swarming women while music played, wine spilled, and bets were placed on how long the victim could endure before collapsing. On those days, a woman's last fragment of dignity was deliberately stripped away. She wasn't treated as human. She was treated as crowd entertainment. And the aftermath was written into medical notes with chilling simplicity. Deaths were recorded from internal injuries, suffocation, and catastrophic blood loss. Clinical phrases that hide the reality. Bodies destroyed for sport. Priests claimed these rituals pleased the gods. In their worldview, wine and the blood of abused women could mix near the altar and still be called sacred. Their final choking breaths were reframed as prayers for fertility, abundant harvests, divine favor. When the festival ended, nothing ended for the women. Those still breathing were dragged back to the brothels to resume work like broken tools returned to storage. The dead were discarded beyond the city walls, thrown into gullies and ravines like refuse no one had the responsibility to bury. The so-called sacred atrocities weren't an exception. They were simply an extension of what Athenian prostitution already was: violence with paperwork. Daily life inside the brothel was not seduction. It was discipline. Constant beatings, sticks, leather straps, fists, delivered as casually as orders. Owners turned cruelty into routine, but sometimes even that wasn't enough. Certain loyal customers were allowed to participate in punishments, as if brutality itself was a privilege purchased with repeat business. Men invented games at the women's expense, escalating pain for the smallest offense: spilling a drop of wine, mispronouncing a name, pausing too long, or committing the ultimate crime: crying. A woman could be locked in a pitch-black room for days with no food or water. And sometimes it was worse, because it was designed to be public. She might be tied to a stone post in the courtyard and left shivering in drenched clothing through winter nights, or baked alive under the summer sun without a drop to drink. Owners called it character correction, as if the bruises and infections were a kind of moral education. Anything nearby could become an instrument: wooden clubs, heavy wine cups, even the blunt ends of knives. Over time, the women learned the one survival rule that mattered most: pain must be silent. A scream only invited laughter. Tears only triggered more violence. They trained themselves to smile through agony because a forced smile was safer than honesty. And the irony is almost unbearable. Athens, the city that praised the perfection of the human body in sculpture and art, turned the bodies of these women into living canvases of bruises, burns, scars, and broken bones. Escape was not treated as desperation. It was treated as theft. A runaway woman was accused of stealing herself from her owner, and the punishment was designed not merely to hurt her, but to permanently erase the idea of escape from every other enslaved woman's mind. Runaways were branded with hot iron on the forehead or chest, marked forever as deserters. Court records suggest even darker outcomes. Some captured women were reportedly nailed to boards and displayed in public squares as warnings, dying slowly from thirst, exposure, or infections rotting through the nail wounds. The city's justice system had endless ways to break a woman's will while still keeping her body usable. Even temples could not protect them. Some women threw themselves at altars begging for sanctuary, hoping the gods might offer what men would not. But priests could be bribed, and property rights outweighed divine mercy. Women were handed back to brothel owners for small payments, dragged away in chains, their blood staining temple steps, stains that other slaves scrubbed away at dawn. Every failed escape attempt tightened the leash. And even then, the truth was more brutal. The system barely needed to punish them. Because new women were cheap. Replacements were constant. Athenian medical writers noted that few of these women survived beyond their mid-20s. Their deaths came the same way their lives did, through exhaustion, injury, infection, and the steady violence of being treated like something that could be used until it broke. Sexually transmitted diseases were everywhere. Infections spread through the brothels like fire through dry grass. Untreated wounds turned black and swollen. Bodies weakened by starvation and sleeplessness simply began to fail. Most women did not die dramatically. They died the way enslaved bodies often do. Slowly, invisibly, and without anyone caring enough to stop it. And the most horrifying part? Even when a woman was visibly sick, when she had festering sores, foul-smelling discharge, open lesions that would make any sane person recoil, she was not removed from service. She was forced to keep working until her body physically collapsed. Owners didn't see disease as a crisis. They saw it as an accounting problem. Medical care cost money. A replacement girl cost less. Customers complained about the stench of blood and rot. But the punishment never fell on the men who demanded her body. It fell on the woman whose body was dying. Beatings followed complaints, as if pain could force flesh to heal, as if bruises could undo infection, as if violence could reverse decomposition. Archaeology gives this horror a physical record. Excavations near sites linked to ancient brothels have uncovered female skeletons carrying unmistakable signs of sustained abuse. Pelvises fractured and deformed from repeated forced intercourse and traumatic childbirth. Skulls split by blunt force strikes. Ribs shattered and healed crooked. Spinal distortions consistent with years of strain, malnutrition, and relentless labor. These bones are not merely remains, they are testimony, a silent archive of what the living were never allowed to report. When a woman became too sick to earn, she was simply discarded. No ritual, no burial, no farewell. She would be carried beyond the city walls and dumped, sometimes while still breathing, like broken property being thrown away. In Athens, the city that produced sculptures of perfect bodies and endless speeches about virtue, women were treated as disposable material. Their bodies were thrown out like shattered pottery. Pregnancy was not viewed as life. It was viewed as damage. A pregnant woman was no longer profitable in the same way, her body altered, her availability limited, so owners treated pregnancy like vandalism against their investment. The punishment was often immediate and brutal. To prevent births, women were forced to drink poisonous brews. Some were struck in the abdomen. Some were made to lift impossible loads until their bodies failed, and the fetus was lost. Ancient medical notes describe abortion practices so violent they feel unreal. Herbs that induced convulsions and internal bleeding, boiling oils, and sharpened sticks forced inside the womb. These were not procedures. They were assaults disguised as medicine. And if pregnancy could not be stopped, if the body refused to collapse, birth happened on the same filthy straw mat where customers had been entertained. No midwives, no sanitation, no relief. Many women bled to death during labor or died afterward from fever and infection, their bodies collapsing at the very moment a life entered the world. Behind some brothel sites, archaeologists have uncovered tiny bones in drainage channels and waste pits, infant remains discarded like trash. Newborn killing was routine, especially girls, and especially children fathered by enslaved men who offered no political or economic value, and in many cases, the women themselves carried the unbearable act out, not because they lacked humanity, but because mercy, in that world, often meant ending a life before it could be stolen and used the way theirs had been. Under Athenian law, these women had no standing as people. Their bodies and labor belonged completely to their owners, They were trapped under fabricated debts: food, clothing, shelter, debts that grew daily through interest, penalties, and invented fines. Refusing a client was impossible even when the client was known for violence. Consent wasn't ignored. It was legally erased. Court documents show a final, sickening layer of the system. If a slave woman tried to seek justice, her testimony could not be used against a free man unless she was tortured first, because the law assumed truth only emerged through pain. In the society that gave the world democracy, women were excluded from it entirely. And enslaved women were lower still, valued less than livestock, which at least had the economic sense to be fed and sheltered so it could keep working. And yet, rarely, something else happened. Once in a long while, a woman might catch a glimpse of another life, a narrow crack in the wall, a faint possibility, not of freedom, but of rising just slightly above the misery. Sometimes the only crack in the wall came through a wealthy patron, a man with enough coin to purchase her freedom, or enough vanity to believe he could save her. Other times, an owner discovered a more profitable use for her, training her to sing, to dance, to play the lyre for higher-class gatherings where men paid not for survival sex, but for the illusion of refinement. But for the overwhelming majority, that moment never came. For them, there was no escape, only endurance. The cycle continued, day after day, until the body failed or the market grew bored. A few women did rise above the common ranks by becoming the favorite of a master or influential patron. In those rare cases, she might be moved into a private chamber instead of the public room. She might wear silks instead of rough wool. Jewelry might hang from her throat and wrists like symbols of status. Slaves might attend her, brush her hair, perfume her skin. But these privileges were never freedom. They were simply the decorations of a gilded cage. Favorites understood a brutal truth. Their position was not earned, it was borrowed. It depended entirely on a man's appetite, which could shift overnight. One rumor, one refusal, one moment of exhaustion, and she could be thrown back into the crowded brothel or quietly disposed of as a problem. And even at the top of this hierarchy, a woman was still property. Historical accounts suggest that favored women were often treated as tokens of hospitality, offered to visiting allies as part of entertainment, lent out for a night, then returned the next morning like an expensive cup passed around at a banquet. A body could be shared the same way wine was shared, not because she consented, but because ownership made consent irrelevant. Even golden chains held as tightly as iron. But youth never lasted. Beauty faded. The novelty vanished. And whether she began as a street-level slave or a privileged mistress, the destination was almost always the same. The moment her value dropped, the protection disappeared. The kindness ended. The attention moved on. Then came the final violence, erasure. These women were denied proper funerary rites. Their bodies were carried beyond the city limits and discarded in ravines, thrown into shallow pits, or buried without marker or offering. Against sacred custom, they received no tombstone, no inscription, no libation poured in remembrance. In Greek society, where even ordinary citizens fought for a name carved into stone, these women were denied the one thing death normally grants: recognition. Even when freedom was achieved, the stain remained. A former prostitute, even a free one, was often untouchable in respectable society. Shut out of civic life, excluded from marriage into honorable households, allowed to exist but never allowed to belong, living not as a person, but as a warning. Archaeology confirms what polite history tried to ignore. Female remains found mixed with household refuse and broken pottery, buried like garbage. No marker, no name, no memory. In a culture that immortalized warriors and statesmen through epic verse and marble sculpture, the lives of these women vanished almost completely. Their suffering was too common to be celebrated, too shameful to be acknowledged, too profitable to be challenged. And the cruelty didn't stop at forgetting. It was woven into entertainment. Comic playwrights like Aristophanes routinely depicted prostitutes as vulgar, greedy, and disposable, women whose humiliation was meant to be funny, whose pain was treated as a punchline. In Athenian theaters, crowds roared with laughter at scenes of beatings, degradation, and sexual coercion. Violence against women wasn't hidden, it was performed. Even in private homes, the normalization continued. Painted pottery, wine cups, and banquet vessels sometimes featured explicit scenes of domination, assault, and degradation, turning cruelty into decoration. The suffering of women became domestic art, something handled, admired, and passed between hands while men drank. Poets occasionally romanticized elite courtesans, but brothel women appeared in writing only as objects, mocked, reduced, dehumanized. Their cries became metaphors, their bodies became jokes. And that is the final truth of this world. Athens could build temples to wisdom, write laws about virtue, and invent democracy, while openly constructing an economy where human suffering was not just tolerated, it was fundamental. In a society that elevated tragic theater into high art, the real tragedies lived by women were turned into comedy. Athenian culture perfected a brutal skill, looking away. Not ignorance, choice, a deliberate blindness that made cruelty feel normal, even civilized. It was the kind of blindness that allowed an economy to thrive on suffering while still congratulating itself for its wisdom. Brothels didn't exist on the margins of Athens. They were part of the system. They paid steady taxes into the city's treasury. The buying and selling of women was not a hidden shame. It was a functioning industry, managed, regulated, and profitable. Democracy flourished in a world where countless women lived in bondage, shut out of political life, stripped of legal identity, treated as property. While Socrates debated the meaning of virtue in the public square, only a few streets away, women were being priced like livestock. While Pericles praised Athens' noble spirit, the city enriched itself through organized trafficking. And this is the part most people don't want to admit. The marble of the Parthenon, the grandeur of the temples, the brilliance of the theater, all of it was built atop an economy that consumed human beings. Athens' splendor was financed, in part by the blood and bodies of enslaved women whose names history refused to record. Modern accounts of ancient Greece, school textbooks, museum tours, tourist guides often soften this reality into something vague or remove it entirely, as if acknowledging the cost might tarnish the glory. But the cost was not abstract. It was tens of thousands of women, and even though their names were erased, their existence wasn't. Their absence isn't silence, it's evidence. In the ruins of Athens, their shadows still remain, unmarked graves beyond the walls, fragments of pottery depicting their humiliation, faint brothel graffiti still clinging to stone. All of it whispers the same truth. They were here, they suffered. And their story deserves to be told. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story hit you, subscribe for more hidden histories, truths buried under marble and myth. And comment below. What part disturbed you the most?